All right, so welcome everyone to today's Back on Track session. Iowa College Aid and ICANN are hosting a variety of events this week to help prepare students for their post-secondary adventures. So you can find the link for more of the events in the chat box. Just make sure you check that out and then attend some of these events that are happening this week. And so we're really happy and excited to welcome Dominic from ACT to help us learn more about this topic. So, first, a few housekeeping items to make sure that this Zoom meeting runs smoothly. So, this is a Zoom meeting, so participants have the ability to unmute themselves at any point and ask any questions to our presenter, Dominic. And we do ask that you mute yourselves unless you're speaking to kind of prevent background noises. Um, this session will be recorded. You can also ask your school counselors for the recording link beginning next week. Again, you can unmute yourself at any point. Just make sure it's a really good stopping point within the presentation. And so now to begin our session, please welcome Dominic. Dominic, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Dominic Iannone. I am an account executive for ACT, and so I am here to talk a little bit today about some resources that are available to students for preparing for the ACT, but also a focus on, what really is the ACT exam and should you take it and why should you take it as a student. So let me share my screen, and if I can do that step successfully, then we'll be in the clear because it's the hardest part. Okay, are we seeing that? I believe so.
Yes.
Excellent. So yeah, I'm gonna focus on free resources. Now, as I said, my name is Dominic Iannone, and before working for ACT, I was a classroom teacher for 13 years here in Iowa, Des Moines and Iowa City mostly. So I have a lot of experience working with students and working with preparing for the ACT with students in the past. So I want to go over a couple of things. One is sort of when you take the ACT, you get this score back. What does that score really mean? Like, is there actually valuable information there for you as a student beyond just what colleges are going to be looking at? And so understanding what that score tells you will help you, because especially if you're doing prep, a lot of your ACT prep is based around starting with some kind of practice exam and getting a practice score and then going from there. So it helps if you're literate on what that score means. I'll go over some of the test prep resources that ACT has available, several of which are free, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Now, if anywhere along the way, anybody who's watching has a question, this doesn't have to be super formal. Feel free to interrupt and ask if you have important questions that come up along the way. So I thought I'd start with a really simple question, which is, should you as a student take the ACT? And my simple answer is yes. Now, you might be a little bit skeptical because, of course, I work for ACT and they sign my paychecks. So it sounds like the kind of thing that I would say, and that's fair. But at the same time, I would point out that ACT didn't like capture me and force me to do this job. I interviewed and applied for it on purpose and everything because I really believe that the ACT is a good tool for student success when used correctly. But let me give you some of the reasons why I think that it's valuable for you as a student to take it rather than thinking so much about what colleges and high schools get out of you taking it. So one is it gives you some information about how well prepared you are for college. And if you can look at those scores and understand what they really mean, then you can tell where your areas of strengths and weakness are as you're preparing for college or even for career right after high school. So it gives you information about yourself. It is used by many schools as an eligibility criteria for scholarship money. And by the way, those scores that they use are often not high, in the sense that you don't have to get a 36 to become eligible to receive money at most colleges. Most colleges have different cutoff levels for different amounts of money, but there's a lot of places where scholarships are attached. They are used for class placement. I know, for example, that at Iowa State, both the math department and the English department use ACT score in combination with other things to help determine your first class placement, your freshman class placement. And then the other thing that it can do is it can put you on the radar for colleges. So if you're intimidated by the college application process and you don't even know where to start looking for colleges, one of the things that is often not talked about that taking the ACT does for you is you become part of a pool of students who have taken that exam. And colleges will contact you and they will send promotional material to you. And by the middle of your senior year, if not earlier, you're going to get really tired of receiving all of those emails from colleges. But it's also a great opportunity to learn about schools that you may not have ever heard of, places that wouldn't have been on your radar. Now they are actively recruiting you. And I think that especially over the course of this last year, one of the biggest question marks around all standardized assessments is, what's the future of this look like, particularly with test optional, which has been around for a while, but became a big buzzword last year with COVID as the majority of colleges moved to some kind of test optional application process. So when it comes to test optional, I would just say that there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The first is that no one can really explain clearly what it means, because like so many things that have to do with college, it's up to each individual institution and college. Test optional is not one policy. And if this is new language to you, by the way, I work at ACT, so of course I'm inundated with this all day. But in the past, most colleges required that you submit either an ACT or an SAT score when you apply. Test optional says that you can submit a score, but you're no longer required to. And then there's another category called test blind. And those are schools that don't even if you have an ACT score, they don't want it and they won't look at it. There are very, very few truly test blind schools. But because of COVID and because of challenges in getting access to testing centers, because so many sites were closing down nationally, a lot of schools adopted a test optional policy where you did not have to submit a score, even if they had previously required one. But at some places, that means that you can't submit a score. At most places, it means that you can submit one. And while it won't change how they admit you, it can still be used for all those scholarship and class placement positions that I was talking about. And the second bullet there where it says no penalty policies, this is becoming more and more common with test optional, where schools say, look, if you had applied and everything about your application was beautiful, and then we saw your standardized test score and it was lower than what we normally expect, that won't affect our admission decision. We're not going to penalize you for a low score, but we could still reward you for not even a high score, but just a score that's strong enough that it shows you're well prepared to succeed in college. So there's really no penalty associated with taking the test under test optional, but it can still benefit you. And then the other thing about test optional is that it may not last, that a lot of schools adopted this because of COVID, and they adopted it either for 1 or 2 or 3 years, but we don't know what that's going to look like in the future. So if you're graduating anytime after this coming year, your school's policy right now might not be the same in a year. So research the schools that you're interested in and see what their policies are, but just be a little bit hesitant about test optional because it can mean a lot of different things. This was one of the places where I anticipated there might be questions. And so I'll pause here for just a moment, just in case there are, because this is all really new. If there's no questions, I'll just steamroll right on to resources and things. Give a moment. Okay, if you think of a question later, just let me know and I can always come back to it. But I do think that the ACT is a valuable thing for you as a student to take. And if you're a guidance counselor, to encourage your students to take, regardless of where they're planning on applying to college, even if you're not 100% certain that you're ready to apply to college, because it'll give you that information that will help you make a good decision. Okay, so on to what is the ACT. So the ACT test is not designed to be an aptitude test. It's not an IQ test. It does not tell you how smart you are. It was designed from the very beginning to not be a test like that. Instead, what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to measure what you have learned in school. And so because of that, it is a notoriously difficult test to cram for. Because if you have a math test coming up and it's over this unit that was 2 weeks long, and let's say that you waited till the last moment and now you're studying for it, that's not ever going to be a best practice in terms of being prepared for that test. But I'm sure that a student or two skates by that way. You really can't do that with the ACT because there's no way to cram the night before for everything that you were supposed to have learned in high school. And so that's the strength of the test in terms of what it measures, but it's also the challenge of the test in terms of preparing for it. So when you get scores back, this is the part where I'm just going to say, okay, after you've taken it, let's say you've already taken it or you're going to be taking it soon and you get your scores back. I think most students know that it's on a 36-point scale with 36 being perfect. And the goal is to get as high as you can. But the numbers in the scores actually have more meaning than that behind them. So in each subject area, there's this number that we call a benchmark score. So you can see, for example, on my page for English, that is 18. For math, that's 22. These are not random numbers. These are numbers that ACT generated based on what we call longitudinal research. They watched some high school students. They took the data from thousands of students who took the test their senior year. And then what they did is they were able to follow the progress of those students through college and see how much their score predicted their ability to succeed in college. And what they found is that these numbers equal a high chance of success. And by high, I mean that if you get an 18 on the English test, then in your first credit-bearing class, so a class that would count towards, for example, your major, if you got the benchmark score, there's a 50% chance that you will get a B or better, and a 75% chance that you will get a C or better. So very high probability that you will earn credit for that class if you were able to meet that benchmark score. So those are the scores that we at ACT say are evidence of college preparedness, that if you can hit those numbers, then you're prepared to earn credit in that subject area your freshman year of college. Now, if you get lower than one of those scores, that does not mean that you're not ready for college, but it might mean, for example, that if you took the math section and you got an 18, that instead of starting in college algebra, it would probably be a good idea for you to start in pre-algebra your freshman year of college, because that score would indicate that you're kind of on the edge of being at a high probability of being successful in that class. That's kind of the information that it's giving you. Now, down at the bottom, you can see there's these composite ones. So the STEM benchmark is 26. That's a pretty high benchmark, but that is specifically for students that are planning on going into a STEM major. So if you wanted to be an engineering major, for example, then they would say that your STEM, which is just basically your science and your math combined, should be at 26, because those students who are taking the STEM fields are more likely to encounter a class like calculus or chemistry their freshman year of college rather than, say, college algebra. So those are what the score numbers actually mean. When you get your score back, it gives it to you in bands like this. But so you can see that it's comparing it to those benchmarks. This student, for example, earned a 24 on the English section, which you can see is well above the benchmark of 18, right? But they're below the benchmark on STEM. This is a fictional student, by the way. We're not sneaking a peek at anybody's scores. Now, another thing that you'll see when you get your scores is that there's actually a whole bunch more information than that. And this is where it can actually be useful to you as a student. Your college is probably not going to dig down into the back of the college report like this, but you as a student definitely could, because what does a single number in math actually mean, right? If you get a 19 in math, what does that mean? Well, this is the different subjects that were covered within that math section. And so we can see that this student actually got all of the questions right for basic number and quantity. And the check mark means that they hit the college preparedness benchmark for that specific subject. But we can see there's a big gap, for example, in statistics and probability. This is probably a student who didn't take a statistics class. So if this was them trying to improve their score or prepare for their next one after a practice test, then they should focus their prep time on these areas where they're weaker rather than on these areas where they're already doing pretty well. And there is actually even more information than this available. If you really, really want to drill down into the weeds, there's something called the ACT College and Career Readiness Standards. And all of these are linked to the standards, and it will tell you based on your score what things the ACT thinks you already know how to do and what things it thinks you need to be able to do in order to score in the next highest score bracket. So there is a lot of ability built into this for self-assessment, not just for other people to look at how students are doing, but for students to look themselves at how they're doing and use that information, empower it in order to get better. And remember, the goal here is not really just to get better on this test. This test is measuring the things that you are supposed to know how to do to be successful in college or career after high school. So when you improve on those things, it shows up in the test. But really the goal is to develop those skills of being very well prepared to succeed. Okay, so how do we go about preparing? And the answer is, don't be scared, don't be freaked out. I know how stressful, I know this is really cheesy, but the ACT is one of those tests that you start hearing about when you're younger, and it starts to build up this sort of like scary feeling. Well, one way to not be scared is to always feel like you're well prepared. Another thing is to recognize that you've been taking standardized tests since you're old enough to read, and that this is just another one of those, that these tests or these assessments are meant to gain data about how well you're doing to help you prepare for the next step, but they're not meant to tell you anything about your self-worth as a human being or how intelligent you are or anything like that. That's not what these tests are for. And anyone that uses them that way is using them for something they're not designed for. So I'm going to start with some free resources. There are some short diagnostic tests that are available just through the main ACT.org website. And those can get you started. They're meant to give you sort of like a basic idea of how you're doing. And there's online practice tests in each subject. As I said, they are pretty short, but there are better ones that will become available to you as soon as you set up an ACT account, which we'll get to in a moment. But this one is just kind of open to anybody. And so parents and students who want to take a look at that are free to do so. Okay, let's get to the more important ones, which is My ACT. So My ACT is something that was rolled out just a little over a year ago. It's still pretty new. Schools are still getting the hang of it, but really it's intended for students. So if you have never done anything ACT before, if you've never taken an ACT exam, you've never taken a pre-ACT exam, you won't have one of these accounts yet, but you can create one anytime you want. Right? The only thing is that you do need to remember the email address and the password that you associated it with. And I would strongly recommend to not make your school email your My ACT account email. And the reason for that is because when you graduate, your school email will disappear, and anything that was connected to it, you will not have access to anymore. So let's say that you take a late in the year, senior year ACT exam, and then the score comes back after you graduate, your email address for that account is now dead, and you may not get the updates. So make it a personal email. But you can do this at any time. You could create this account now, and then even if you're not going to register for the ACT for 2 years, you can start to get access to some of the resources that are in here. Once you're logged in, it's going to look like this. So there's a couple of things right away. You can see, for example, we've got our register for the ACT. So if you were looking for a national testing site near you, you can register for that there. Some schools actually do the ACT at their school. So if your school does that, then instead of registering here, your school is going to be giving you a code, and you use that code here so that you're registered with your school. If you're not sure if your school does that, just ask your counselor if your school does district testing or whether you're going to be doing your testing at a national test site. But once again, it doesn't matter for just setting up your account. If I kind of zoom out a bit, you can see some of the other things that are here. Now, there's this ACT prep guide. I'm pretty sure this links you just straight to our Amazon store to buy the official ACT prep book. There are some self-paced courses. These ones that you're seeing on the front, the top three and this one, those all cost money. And I'll show you those in a moment. But this one, the ACT free online tests, that one is one that you get access to just by setting up a MyACT account. So as soon as you get this set up, you'll be able to take that, and it will give you a predicted score and give you your areas of strength and weakness right there. So anybody can do that for free once they've set up that account. You can see that there is a full-length section for English, math, reading, and science. There is also a practice essay prompt, but if you want to do the writing section, those are scored by people who read them, and so that's not available for free, but you can get the prompt and you can do the writing practice if you'd like to. Once you take the practice tests, you get a predicted score, and you get that same information that we talked about where you get your areas of strength and weakness. And then there's also every day, there's these questions of the day where it'll not only give you a question and you can kind of use it like a trivia to test out, but once you submit your answer, it will not only tell you if you got it right, but it'll explain the concept that was being tested. So it's really not just a question of the day, but it's a little lesson of the day. This is something that the ACT does cover, and you can do a little 5-minute, 10 minutes of prep each day, which is really the best way. Like spreading out your preparation over the course of a year is really the best way to prepare for a test like the ACT, or if you're interested in medicine, the MCAT or any of those other big tests that are going to be testing a whole bunch of content that you can't possibly cram all at the same time. So that's the academic piece of MyACT with those practice tests and those practice questions. There's also within MyACT these inventories. And these are essentially career and interest inventories that will help you kind of look at. Now, I often find that a lot of students think they know what they're interested in, and that would be your interests inventories. But there's also things here like aptitude inventories, which are not about what you think you would like to do, but what are the things that you're good at? What are the areas where you have strengths? Because I know a lot of people or a lot of students who go into college, like for example, a very, very common major that students choose their freshman year and then switch out of is engineering. And engineering is very hard, but it's not because those students aren't smart enough or capable enough. It's because they realize after taking a couple of engineering classes that it's not what they thought it was, and that they don't actually like it that much. Like it doesn't appeal to them the way that they thought it would. So looking not just at your interests, but at your aptitudes and your skill sets, and thinking about what is something that I'm going to actually enjoy doing as a career or as a profession. This will help you do that. It also has tools for exploring colleges. It will give you basic information about any college in the country. It'll tell you their admissions profile. It'll take your predicted scores, and it'll tell you how competitive you would be as an applicant at each of those schools just based on your scores. So that's another resource that becomes available to you as soon as you set up a MyACT account. One thing that I wanted to bring up is fee waivers. So if you qualify, or if any student who qualifies for free or reduced price lunch, you can take the ACT at a national test center for free. So the way that you go about doing that is you go to your school's guidance office and you ask them for an ACT fee waiver. Many schools order these at the beginning of the year and they have them on hand. But if they don't, then they can order them and they can get them for you. Basically, your school requests it, and they're the ones who say, we will make sure that these go to students who qualify. And then after that, the schools distribute them. And it's just a code. So once you get that code, you enter it into MyACT when you go to register for a national testing center, and it will automatically make that free for you. It will also allow you, with the fee waiver, you can send scores to, I believe, up to 4 colleges for free as well. That's all included in the waiver. So if you're worried about the cost, if the cost is a barrier, talk to your guidance office and talk to them about fee waivers. And once again, anybody who is free and reduced price lunch qualifies for those. And if your counselor is not sure how to go about making that order, you can have them contact me at ACT or just the ACT helpline, and we will help them set that up. Now, there are also some fee-based prep materials available, and I'll run through those really quickly. I kind of wanted to emphasize the free ones, but other things that you'll see once you log into my ACT, there is kind of a cooperation with Kaplan. There's an official self-paced course. This is really good if you need structure, but you want to work on your own schedule and you want to practice what you learn after each lesson with immediate answers. So the self-paced course is accessible anywhere that has internet access, you can get onto it. You can set your own schedule. There's videos which are organized into 30 different lessons with official ACT practice exams. And that's the big advantage of when you get things that are official ACT versus something else, is that our process for creating test questions is incredibly rigorous. Every test question that you see on an ACT went through at least a year of review process before it actually made it onto an ACT exam. So the ones that come from us are going to be just like the ones on the actual ACT. Any ones that come from other sources might still be good review, but don't expect them to perfectly emulate the style of the questions on the ACT. Let's see here, another one. This is the fee waivers. And by the way, something with the fee waivers is that when you receive a fee waiver, the fee waiver will work more than once. So it's within a year, but you could register for more than once if you wanted to, and you also get access to that self-paced course for free. There is an online course that is live. So the big difference between these two, other than this one is much more expensive, is that this one has a live instructor who is available, and it's got set time. So if you need a little bit more structure and you want somebody to actually be there helping you, that is available. And then there's also one-on-one tutoring, which is the most expensive option, but also will give you the most customized work. You'll notice that all of these are 6 months because ACT research shows that 6 months is about the shortest amount of time that you can effectively prep and expect to see your score go up. So if you've got a prep schedule and you think that you're going to prep in 2 weeks before the exam, I wish you the best of luck. Our research team is betting against you, but I hope you beat the odds. But really what you need to do is you need to set aside chunks of time, bits of time, and spread it out over 6 months at least. And that's where you're going to see the biggest improvements. So that's just a quick review of those things that I was showing you. Those are all the 4 fee options, and those you will see when you log into my ACT. And then the last thing, because I'm really focusing on just resources that are for students, would be test information release. Now, this isn't something that everybody can do, but if you fall into certain categories, you can actually ask to see a copy of your test. This is only available if you do national testing in December, April, or June. If you test in any other month and you ask for this, they'll tell you that it's not available. But if you did test in one of those months, then for an additional fee, you can get a copy of basically your test version. Now, so that you can go over your answer document and see the questions that you missed. I know that one of the things that's frustrating about these standardized tests is that you get a score, but you never get to see which questions you missed. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunately also necessary because of the way that test security functions, that we can't release all of these exams into the wild, but there are a few of these each year that is available for. So if you're a student that falls in that category and you really want to see how you did, not just your number, but also which questions you missed, that's going to be the best option. So I know I ran through a lot of information and I'm happy to go back and revisit any of it, but just remember that the ACT is not just about this single number score or even your subject area scores. It's really about identifying the skills that you need to be successful after high school, which is coming up very fast, and making sure that that you know where your areas of strength and weakness are so that you can work on them. Everybody at ACT, that is our mission. It is to make sure that students are prepared to do well. But we firmly believe that if you're going to be well prepared, then we need to check in on where you are in your level of preparation along the way so that we can help you get to the next level. So that's the basics of what I brought with me. And I can go back to any section of it if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much, Dominic, for that amazing presentation. If you all have any final questions, please feel free to write that in the chat box or unmute yourselves if you'd like to ask it. And so while you're asking your questions, I'll just go ahead and say a few announcements. So as a reminder, our Back to Track sessions are happening all week. So please feel free to check out the link that I've posted in the chat box. And then, yeah, so we'll just wait for a few minutes to have people ask them questions. So let's see. So I do have a quick question for you, Dominic.
Sure.
Would you recommend for students to retake the ACT exam if they've received a score that they're not really proud of?
Yeah, so ACT research shows that students who take the ACT more than once, there is an improvement in score. So on average, taking the ACT more than once helps you. Another thing that's new as of, gosh, I think this went live in February, something called super scoring. So if you took the ACT more than 6 months ago, then this is going to sound really unfair that you didn't have access to this. But with a super score, what it does is if you take the test more than once, it makes a new composite score for you made up of your best performance on each subsection. So if you were really close to getting the score that you wanted for a scholarship, for example, but let's say just your math was low, well, the fear when you retake is that your score will go down. But if you only need to get that one subject area a little bit higher, then the risk is a lot lower because of the way super scoring works. The cost of the ACT. So it depends. If your fee waiver, it's free. If you're registering for national testing, then if you do it with no writing, you're not going to take the writing section, then this year I think it's $60. And if you do it with writing, then it's $80. If schools are signing up, then the pricing is different. So then it's a totally different set of numbers when schools are signing up to have their students test at school.
Thank you, Carla, for that question. I do have another question. I guess for students who might have like testing anxiety or
Sure.
May not perform as well on tests, what types of recommendations would you have for them?
That's a really good question. And like I said, I was a classroom teacher for a long time and I taught AP. So high stakes testing and testing anxiety is very real and it definitely impacts a lot of students. And I think that there are strategies that you can learn. I think that practice is actually really important because practice helps reduce anxiety because it makes things more familiar. So those little practice questions, those little practice tests, just kind of building your confidence that you do understand the format of the test. You're not going to get anxious about the time limits because you practiced with them. But also, I think just personally for me, a little bit more philosophically, it's just taking a deep breath and realizing that it's important in the sense that doing well can help you, but it's one number, it's one piece of information in the grand sea of everything that you've done in high school. And not only should you remember that, but you got to remember that colleges and high schools, like they know that as well. They're not looking for just one number or one score that defines you. So don't make it a bigger thing in your mind than it really is. Kind of keep things in perspective your senior year, but also, hydrate, get good sleep, all those typical study tests.
That is really amazing advice. If you all have any more questions, please feel free to either type that in the chat function or unmute yourselves. But again, thank you so much, Dominic, for this amazing
Yeah, you're
presentation.
welcome.
I've learned, new things myself.
Oh, good.
Right. And so just a few more announcements before we end this session. Thank you to all of our partners that made this event possible. And if you give me just a few seconds, I will share my screen so I can show you all who our wonderful partners are. Yeah.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. So it seems like when I share my screen,
It automatically mutes you.
it mutes me. So I will just go back to telling you all about these announcements. So again, thank you to all our partners and sponsors. Lastly, this Sunday, the Golden Circle College and Career Fair is happening from 1 to 3 p.m. in Altoona. So if you're interested in learning more or attending the link, I will post that in the chat box right now. And this is just a really great way to network with admission counselors and employers. And then again, thank you so much, Dominic. This is really helpful information.
You're
Please
very
go
welcome.
to the ACT.org website to get a lot of the information that Dominic went over today, along with the practice exams and things like that. And yeah, with that being said, I hope everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Too.